Thank you, Mr. President. The killing of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani needed to happen, and President Donald Trump was the man to do it. Everyone knew the blood of Americans was on his hands, responsible for the murder of more than 600 American service members and thousands of others whose blood and limbs were spilled and left on the sands of the Middle East. He implemented the explosive devices capable of piercing through our American armor. His ruthless reign of terror, both celebrated and legendary against Americans, our allies, and Muslims, would have continued had this monster not been stopped. The president did not risk a single life in his effort to eliminate this sadistic beast who, according to all reports, as well as his history, was a clear and present danger to America. Folks, you know the president means what he says and says what he means. He is not interested in war. He is interested in America and protecting it. And in so doing, he will take swift, decisive, and strategic action and take no prisoners along the way. And whether they'll admit it or not, all Americans should be thankful. Our allies should be thankful. Indeed, the world should be thankful for the removal of the world's most dangerous terrorist. Folks, this day has been 40 years in the making. I told you last year that Iran was determined to provoke us, and indeed was provoking us. And to all those who criticize the president for not trying diplomacy, a primer. This president has repeatedly tried diplomacy, stepped back, talked about restraint, and refused to take action when ironically criticized for not doing so. Take a listen. In the last month, as Iran has reacted to the economic stranglehold under which it is suffering because of the sanctions President Trump has put on it, a far cry, by the way, from the rollover reward of $150 billion Obama gave them and gave that regime, which was used to fund terrorism throughout the world, Iran is responding with extreme provocation, hitting oil tankers. When an American drone, however, with a wingspan as wide as a 737, was brought down by an Iranian missile, it seemed that Iran was determined to provoke us. The president was ready to conduct strikes, but pulled back because, as he said,
they shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it, and here we are sitting with 150 dead people, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it was proportionate.
And in the last 2 weeks, Iran has been responsible for an attack on a U.S. embassy in Iraq where an American was killed. Remind you of Benghazi? The parallels are frightening. Soleimani actually helped plan the Benghazi attack, where 4 Americans were killed, and our last president never bothered to respond, while he and his gang of apologists said the massacre of Americans was due to a video. Here, this President Trump took swift and precise action. His response, where an American was killed, was immediate. Yes, indeed. The days of appeasement are over. Gone are the days when the U.S. feats Iran, brings her to the table to give her $150 billion and an additional $400 million on pallets flown in unmarked planes, as the United States lets out the Gitmo detainees to return to the battlefield. We now have a president who negotiates from strength, not from weakness. A man who has exhibited tremendous restraint while constantly being provoked by Iran. His red line was the killing of an American, and true to his word, it was only then that he responded. He had tried everything, and economic sanctions were imposed, themselves recognized as appropriate and responsible action in the spectrum of diplomacy. And yet they continued to poke the eye of the tiger. The president even tweeted, Iran will pay a very big price for any damage or loss of life. Quote, this is not a warning, it's a threat. So Should we roll over and let them kill us? Should we decide who should be killed first, or how many of us we will tolerate being killed before we act? Should we allow further casualties? It's not an act of war. It's not unauthorized force when the commander-in-chief is defending Americans from imminent deadly harm. And for those bozos who say that the president is using Iran to distract us from impeachment, he could have done this on any one of the last 1,079 days because they've been trying to impeach him since day one. And Chuck Schumer says this.
This action may well have brought our nation closer to another endless war, exactly the kind of endless war the president promised he would not drag us into.
So, for Chuck and all you snowflakes who say this means war, I've got news for you. We've already been in a shadow war with Iran for decades. They haven't confronted us with conventional military action because they're weak, and we have superpower capabilities thanks to President Donald J. Trump. They've prosecuted their war against us by the use primarily of non-state proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as well as the Shia militants in Iraq, Syria and Lebanon. So, Iran denies responsibility, and they conduct a shadow war with relative impunity, from taking hostages in '79 to blowing up the Marine barracks and killing 220 Marines, blowing up our embassy in Beirut in 1983, to the most recent attack on oil tankers in an attempt to knock out the world's oil production in retaliation for our pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal and the imposition of economic sanctions. In fact, Soleimani himself is quoted as saying, "It is time to take our swords out and teach them a lesson." By taking out Soleimani, we have put the Iranians on notice that its use of proxies will no longer protect those who plan or give orders for attacks against us. They personally will be held responsible. Trump's attack was precise. It avoided a needless loss of civilian life. It did not entail boots on the ground. So does this mean inevitable war? No one can predict where this will lead. The Iranians have multiple military and economic interests in America, which they can target. However, they now know their use of proxies will not insulate them personally from retaliation and preemptive action. The president's thinking on this has not been shoot from the hip. It was set strategically in motion this past April when Iran's Revolutionary Guard and its commanders were labeled terrorists. That was the game changer, my friends. It served notice to Iran's leaders, particularly those in the Iran Revolutionary Guard, that they themselves, not their subordinates, will pay the price. And if they go to bed planning an attack on America, they may wake up on the receiving end of an American plan to preempt them. Thank God for President Donald Trump. And that's my open. Let me know what you think on my Facebook and Twitter, #Judge Jeanine.